Stop. Listen up, you guys. In this episode, we're going to talk about 5 mistakes I see so many beginning gardeners making when planting fruit trees. Let's go. First mistake I see a lot of gardeners making, not having the right type of soil and planting their fruit trees where they think is going to be convenient. There's an old saying, plant it where it wants to grow. That saying holds true to just about everything, but specifically trees that are going to be here for not just 1 year, but 10, 20, 50, or even 100 years. You want to make sure that you plant them where they want to grow. Now, there's also another saying, don't try to fit a round peg into a square hole. That's simply because if the environment is not going to be conducive for that tree to grow, it's never going to grow well. It's going to always struggle. And so get the soil right first and then plant your trees. Our soil right here that we're growing in is a sandy loam. That means that it has a lot of organic material that's been broken down into like silt and organic material, but it also has a lot of sand in it. So even though it looks clumpy, it's not actually that compactable. It's very, very loose once it's actually broken up. That is ideal because what we want is a well-draining soil. We want something that is going to drain well, hold on to some water, but not too much water, and allow those roots to really move throughout the soil well. So don't just say, I would love to have a fruit tree here, or I'd love to have any type of tree here, so therefore I'm going to plant it. Make sure the soil is right first. Otherwise, it's an uphill battle. Second mistake I see gardeners making is not making a wide enough hole when they plant their trees. The hole you dig should always be twice the size of the root ball. That's because you want to make sure that when you're digging your holes, you've got some loose soil that's going to help to prevent what we call root bound or pot bound. That happens when those roots inside the pots are coiling around and around and around. And if you take it out of a pot and you move it into a size hole that's about exactly the same size as the pot that it was growing in, those roots are going to have essentially muscle memory. We do things a lot, right? We do things by habit so often that it becomes second nature. And so when your roots start growing in a certain direction, it kind of can become second nature if you put them in a hole too small. And so what we're going to do, we're going to dig this hole out twice the size, at least twice the size, and we're going to definitely backfill some soil back in the hole, but it's going to keep it loose. So when the roots start to develop, they're going to move into some nice loose soil, and that's going to get them out of that kind of coiling structure that they've been in for so long. Third mistake I see a lot of gardeners making when they are planting their trees is they want to fertilize right away, or they want to add compost to the hole. Huge, huge mistake. Huge mistake. Now, I don't blame you for wanting to do that. The thing is if you do that, what you're doing is you're essentially spoon feeding these trees right where they are, and they're not encouraged to move throughout the soil. The roots have to search for water. They have to search for fertilizer, and they've got to find they kind of have to get their footing in the soil. If you were to add compost right to this hole, and I see so many videos recommending it to amend the hole, the problem is that all you're doing is you're encouraging those roots. If it's better there than it is out here, they're going to stay right here. They're not going to move throughout the soil. And inevitably what you're going to have happen is you're going to have a very underdeveloped, immature root system. The tree is going to be more likely to blow over in strong winds. It's going to be more likely to suffer from things like root rot. It's also, and this is the biggest thing, when it gets hot and dry, that's where you're going to notice stress on the tree. Because the roots are not moving deeply through the soil and they're not moving out. If it gets hot and it gets dry, there's no protection from that, and your trees are really going to suffer. And so make sure you don't fertilize for at least 3 months after planting. All right, the fourth mistake that way too many gardeners make when planting fruit trees is planting them too deep. Now, I know this seems crazy. I can hear you already. Luke, that hole is only 8 inches deep. What on earth are you thinking? Yeah, well, okay, down below this, we've already worked this soil. We've already put it back in, right? We took this dirt out to dig the hole, and we've put it back in so it's nice and loose. That's okay. That's fine. But why is it so shallow? And that's because we don't want to bury past the original soil level. There's a lot of really bad things that can happen. The first thing that can happen is this little mark here. You can see it better from this side. This little yellow mark. Every nursery will do this differently. That is a paint mark to notate where the graft is. Essentially what they did is when they took this tree, this is a Golden Delicious. They took a Golden Delicious, essentially stem, and it was growing on a big Golden Delicious tree. They chopped that off and they matched it up with a rootstock of a similar diameter. And what they did is they took a splice, or sometimes they take a little angle cut. There's a lot of different ways to graft. And they basically made a little wedge out of the rootstock. That's an apple tree of a different variety. Sometimes they're bred for genetic just vigor, right? They're more vigorous, they fruit more. Some are more disease resistant, drought tolerant. They might have just traits that make them more desirable. It could even be the size of the tree. Sometimes the trees can get really large, but the rootstock can sometimes keep them smaller and more semi-dwarf. That's great for home gardeners. It's also great if you're planting them high intensity like this. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to bury it over top of that rootstock, because what can happen is it can actually cause the rootstock to start growing. And if that happens, it'll steal energy away and it'll actually terminate this whole tree. It'll actually kill it off and then start to grow a whole new apple, which might not sound like the worst thing in the world. Problem is you have no idea what that apple is. And in a lot of cases, about 80% of the time, it's literally a crab apple. That's because crab apples are so vigorous. They're so resilient to environmental conditions, pests, disease, droughts, whatever, heat waves. And so when you plant your trees, you want to make sure you avoid going above that graft point. And it's not always marked. It is not always marked. Sometimes you can tell just from where there's kind of a stem change. It's kind of coarse down here and it goes kind of smooth up here. That is super, super important. So then we're going to take it, we're going to backfill it. And we want to make sure if you're mulching, mulching is super important. We're going to bring some mulch in here as well later. When you bring mulch in, you don't want a huge mound of mulch coming up here either. That's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to encourage roots and rot to start happening up top. You don't want that. And so we want to make sure we have more of a gentle slope downward rather than a huge volcano mounted up around the stem. It's not conducive for a healthy tree long term. Then what we're going to do is we're going to pack it around ever so slightly to kind of settle the soil around the roots, keep it from shifting and tilting, removing any air gaps. And like I said, we're going to follow up with some mulch after the fact to help hold water near the soil, keep the soil a little more cool in the summer. So that is that. On to the next mistake. All right, and this is the fifth and final mistake I see so many gardeners making, and I think this is the biggest mistake I see so many gardeners making, and that is not removing the nursery tape. This is so important. It's so important that the reason why I made it last is because this could quite literally be the reason why you're killing your trees. Everything else could go right and the trees could be thriving, and these could be killing your tree. Now, nurseries will often add a little bit of support for their trees to keep them when they're in pots from tipping over. And a lot of times that helps kind of just keep them nice and sturdy. You absolutely have to remove them. Coming in close, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. We're going to take all these off here because what can happen is they can actually girdle the stem. So see this right here? There's not a lot of wiggle room for this stem to grow and develop. And I would much rather take this post actually completely out and let the tree sway. Agricultural universities have done quite a few studies on the health of the tree if you let it either sway or be supported. And in almost every single case, what they have found is that a tree that is kept supported will have less resilience to strong winds later on. So do yourself a favor and remove them. Here's another one, little staple. That one came off pretty easy. Also, the plant tag. Come in here real close. Check this out. See these plant tags? Look how tight this is, right? Not the fault of the nursery. They're just trying to keep everything organized. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this off because look how tight that was. Eventually what we're going to do is we're going to make some more permanent tags here. But that has been moved out to a branch now. It's going to develop far slower, and we have a little bit more wiggle room. So that is not going to restrict the stem. All right, and so the final one here is down here, and look at how, I'm gonna take this post out. Look at how tight this thing is. Look at how tight this is. I mean, again, this happens, and it's actually starting to cut into the stem here. So we're gonna relieve this. It's been on here for a while. Look at that, check that out, look at that. Now the tree can breathe. Look how tight that was around the stem there. And so that is now going to be so much better off. Sometimes those bottom ones will notate where there was a graft point. Sometimes, which that's what that was notating where there was a graft point. But then also, sometimes it was an old support post that when they first did it, they just left it on there. And so going through there now, that was, I think, 3 or 4 things that could have totally killed this tree, that now it is free to expand and to grow and be a tree. And so those are the 5 mistakes I see so many gardeners making. You know, if I could throw in a 5th, or I guess a 6th bonus one for you guys, it's making sure that when you plant in the spring or the fall, a lot of gardeners make the mistake of thinking that there is adequate water because it's the rainy season. We do get a lot of rain in spring, and we do get a lot of rain in fall. However, it's still inconsistent, and because you don't have a crystal ball and you don't know when it's going to rain, you want to make sure that you water very regularly, even if it's the rainy season. If you happen to get rain, that's fine. That's irrelevant. But if you don't get rain, you want to go out there and water. Now, a newly planted tree like this, of this size, it's going to have about 3 to 5 gallons a week of water requirements, upwards of 10 gallons depending on where you are. And our climate, our season, how much rain we normally get, I'd say 3 to 5 gallons is just fine for us. But if you're in a drier, more arid climate, 10 gallons might be necessary. And so that's pretty regular waterings until this tree gets fully established and rooted into the native soil. And it's just a big mistake that you could actually kill your tree by thinking there's water in the soil, or maybe it's raining, it's gonna rain soon, and it ends up not, and then the tree suffers from just drying out. Oh, and there's one more. I'll give you 2 bonus ones. If you like this video, you'll hear the bonus. Just kidding, I'm gonna talk about it anyways. But please make sure you like this video, because these videos, if it's not for you liking this video or commenting, some type of engagement, YouTube does not spread it around to other people to get this information. And so the, I guess, 7th mistake is going with too large of a tree. Now, I know that as a beginning gardener myself, I always wanted to plant a tree that looked big, like it was gonna fruit that next year. And it's that I call it the instant gratification trap. And what they have found is that there's actually, because of instant gratification, there's actually a time that takes for a larger tree to get established. The larger the tree, the slower the time it takes for it to get established and start fruiting. So much so that if you were to take a fully mature fruiting sized fruit tree and put it in the ground next to one like this has about a 1/2 inch caliper. That's the thickness of the stem. The tree that is fully mature and fruiting size will only fruit about a 1/2 a season earlier than this tree right here. At a 1/2 inch caliper, this tree is about 3 to 4 years old, and a tree that is fruiting size is about 5 to 6 years old. That means you're going to not only be saving money, but you're actually going to be having a faster growing, more established tree in the long run by going with something a little bit smaller, rather than going with something that's larger for that instant gratification. And it's going to take a whole lot longer for it to get established, and you may not get any more fruit and in the long run. So go with a smaller tree. You'll thank me later. And that it's easier to plant too. Smaller root ball, smaller hole, right? It's just, yeah, it's a whole lot easier. So anyways, those are 7 things I see a lot of gardeners making, mistakes I see a lot of gardeners making when planting fruit trees. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, this is Luke from the My Gardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider clicking this one. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. Also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free, and we upload videos every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. We also have vegetable seeds, fertilizer, or tools. If you need any of those, consider visiting mygardener.com. Links will be in the description box below. We've got you covered. And as always, we'll see you all in the garden. Take care.